It started like any other day. A headache, a cold, a little pain, nothing serious. You grab a bottle of Tylenol from the shelf, swallow a couple capsules, and then within minutes you're gone, dead. Not from the illness, but from the very medicine you trusted to help you. In the fall of 1982, 7 people in the Chicago area died suddenly after taking Tylenol. It wasn't a manufacturing defect, it wasn't bad luck, it was murder. Someone had laced ordinary capsules with potassium cyanide, a deadly poison, and returned them to store shelves, targeting random, innocent strangers. This wasn't just a crime. This was terror, and it sparked a nationwide panic, forever changing the way we buy and trust over-the-counter medicine. But here's the real twist. No one was ever arrested for the murders. And 4 decades later, the case is still officially unsolved. So what really happened in the Tylenol murders? Who was the prime suspect? Why wasn't anyone held accountable? And why is Netflix shining new light on a case the FBI couldn't close? Buckle up, because what you're about to hear is one of the most chilling unsolved mass murders in American history. They weren't connected, they didn't know each other, they weren't celebrities or criminals. They were just normal people living normal lives, until one tiny capsule ended it all. Let's talk about the 7 confirmed victims of the Tylenol murders, not as names on a list, but as human beings with stories. Mary Kellerman was just 12 years old. She woke up with a sore throat. Her parents gave her a Tylenol. Within hours, she collapsed and died. Adam Janis, a 27-year-old postal worker, took Tylenol for chest pain and died suddenly. Later that same day, Adam's brother Stanley and sister-in-law Teresa, while grieving at his house, also took Tylenol from the same bottle. They both died too. Mary Riener, a new mom who had just returned home from the hospital after giving birth, took 2 Tylenols and collapsed. Paula Prince, a flight attendant, was caught on a store surveillance camera buying Tylenol. Days later, she was found dead in her apartment. Mary McFarland, a 31-year-old retail worker, took Tylenol while on break. She collapsed and died in the employee lounge. Different towns, different situations, no shared friends, no common link except one. They all took extra strength Tylenol. These weren't targeted killings. This was random, cold, indiscriminate, and that's what made it so terrifying. If a child, a mother, and a grieving brother can all fall victim within hours, then no one is safe. And in that moment, America realized this wasn't just murder, this was psychological warfare. At first, doctors were confused. These people weren't just dying, they were dying fast. Within minutes of swallowing Tylenol, they were collapsing, gasping for air, their bodies shutting down. Medical examiners began autopsies immediately, and what they found was chilling. Massive amounts of potassium cyanide in their systems. Cyanide is a deadly poison. Just a tiny amount can kill a person in minutes. It blocks the body's ability to use oxygen, essentially suffocating you from the inside out. But where was it coming from? Investigators turned their attention to the Tylenol bottles. They ran chemical tests on the capsules, and there it was. Some of them were packed with cyanide, not contaminated accidentally, but deliberately filled with poison. The realization hit like a freight train. Someone had tampered with store-bought medicine, opened the bottles, emptied the capsules, added cyanide, sealed them back up, and placed them on store shelves, then waited. There was no way to know how many more bottles were out there, no way to warn people fast enough. The public was in a panic, and for good reason, because this wasn't just one bad batch. This was someone hunting strangers with pills. Once investigators confirmed that Tylenol capsules had been laced with cyanide, the response had to be immediate. Lives were at risk. People all over the country had Tylenol in their homes, in their purses, in their medicine cabinets, completely unaware that just one capsule could kill them. Johnson & Johnson, the company behind Tylenol, acted fast. Within days, they issued a nationwide recall. Over 31 million bottles were pulled from shelves. That recall cost the company more than $100 million, but they didn't hesitate. Stores removed every bottle of Tylenol from their shelves. Hospitals began reporting waves of people rushing in, terrified they had taken poisoned pills. Hotlines were overwhelmed. Pharmacies were flooded with returns. People began throwing out every capsule-shaped medicine they had. Tylenol went from being one of the most trusted painkillers in America to a product no one would touch. And yet, despite the chaos, one thing became clear. Johnson & Johnson's fast and transparent response was a turning point in crisis management history. The company went public with every detail they had. They advised consumers to stop using all Tylenol products, and they cooperated fully with investigators. In the middle of a national panic, Johnson & Johnson took responsibility. But even as they worked to protect the public, the real question remained. Who did this, and how many bottles were still out there? With the country in shock and Tylenol bottles vanishing from shelves, federal investigators launched one of the largest manhunts in American history. The FBI, local police, the FDA, and even the Department of Justice were all involved. But they had a problem. There were no fingerprints, no security cameras, no DNA. Surveillance technology in 1982 was primitive, and tamper-evident packaging didn't exist yet. Whoever did this had walked into local stores, bought Tylenol, poisoned it, and returned it to the shelves, all without leaving a trace. And since the poisonings happened in different towns, it was clear the killer had gone to multiple stores. This wasn't random or impulsive. It was planned, coordinated, cold. Agents started tracking lot numbers and shipment routes, trying to find a pattern. They interviewed store employees, questioned pharmacists, studied the manufacturing process. They even considered whether it was an inside job, maybe someone in the supply chain. But the evidence led nowhere. The capsules weren't tampered with at the factory. The poison was added after the bottles were already in stores. That meant the killer was a member of the public, someone walking freely among the rest of us. Tips poured in from across the country. Every crank call and copycat incident added noise to the chaos, but there was no solid lead, no arrest, no one caught on camera. And as the days passed, another disturbing question began to surface. Was this person done or just getting started? A few days after the murders, Johnson & Johnson received a typed letter. It was cold, calculated, and terrifying. The author claimed responsibility for the Tylenol deaths and demanded $1 million to stop the killings. This wasn't just a threat. It was extortion tied to mass murder, and the signature at the bottom led the FBI to a name: James William Lewis. Lewis was quickly tracked down in New York City. He denied being the killer but admitted to writing the letter. His reason? He claimed he wanted to exploit the situation, not cause it. He said he had nothing to do with the deaths, but saw an opportunity to make money. It was a bizarre defense. Investigators were split. Some believed he was just an opportunist. Others were convinced he knew more than he was saying. He had a dark past, a criminal record, a history of fraud, and an obsession with chemistry and control. Some former colleagues described him as highly intelligent, but manipulative and angry. He was also known to have lived in Chicago, the epicenter of the poisonings. But when it came to hard evidence proof that he had bought, poisoned, and returned Tylenol bottles, there was nothing. No eyewitnesses. no cyanide, no physical link between Lewis and the tainted capsules. In the end, he was convicted only of extortion and served more than 12 years in federal prison. But despite being released and living free for years after, many believe he was still hiding something. Because one question haunted the case then and now. Why would someone write a letter confessing to something they didn't do unless they had a reason to keep the truth buried? In 2023, just before his death, James Lewis agreed to something he had refused for decades, a filmed interview. That conversation would become the centerpiece of Netflix's cold case, the Tylenol Murders. For the first time, viewers saw the man long suspected of America's most terrifying product tampering crime speak directly to camera. No lawyer, no courtroom, just him. And what he said was deeply unsettling. Lewis didn't confess, but he didn't deny either. He danced around the questions, giving vague, sometimes philosophical answers. He claimed the case against him was built on public hysteria and media obsession. But when asked specific questions about how cyanide might have been handled or how someone could pull off such a crime, his answers were chillingly detailed. At times, he sounded more like a lecturer than a man trying to clear his name. He described how easy it would be to open a capsule and insert powder. He even mused about how someone could tamper with multiple bottles and return them to stores without being noticed. The interviewer asked him directly, "Did you do it?" Lewis smiled, paused, and said, "I'm not going to answer that." He died not long after. No deathbed confession. No final closure, just more questions, more speculation, and a fresh wave of public fascination. To some, the interview was proof of his guilt, a narcissist enjoying the spotlight one last time. To others, it was the final act of a manipulator who had spent decades playing the system and getting away with it. One thing was clear: if he wasn't the killer, he knew enough to sound like one. To understand James Lewis, you have to look beyond the headlines. He wasn't just a name on a suspect list. He was a deeply complex figure who fascinated and disturbed everyone who encountered him. He was intelligent, no one doubted that. He taught himself chemistry, computer programming, and even graphic design. He wrote technical manuals, hacked systems, and manipulated people with alarming ease. But behind the intellect was a man with a dark and unstable history. He had previously been charged with dismembering and hiding the body of an elderly man in Kansas City, though that case collapsed due to mishandled evidence. He was also accused of check fraud, identity theft, and threatening behavior in multiple states. Wherever he went, trouble followed. Psychologists who reviewed his behavior noted signs of narcissism and sociopathy. He seemed to lack empathy. He enjoyed being the smartest person in the room, and when confronted, he often responded with sarcasm or smug defiance. In his interview, he played mental games. He used misdirection. He never lost control, but never told the full truth either. It was like he was daring people to figure him out, staying one step ahead. Some investigators believe he wanted credit without consequences, that he wrote the extortion letter not to get rich, but to insert himself into the narrative, to be known, to be feared. Because even if he didn't lace the capsules with cyanide, he knew exactly how the killer did it, and he relished the attention that knowledge brought him. To this day, the question lingers: was James Lewis a brilliant manipulator caught in the wrong place at the right time, or a cold-blooded killer who pulled off the perfect crime? 40 years later, the Tylenol murders remain one of the most terrifying unsolved crimes in American history. No arrests, no trial, no conviction, just 7 innocent lives lost and a cloud of fear that never fully lifted. But the impact of the case went far beyond the investigation. In response to the panic, federal laws were changed. The US government passed the Federal Anti-Tampering Act, making it a crime to maliciously tamper with consumer products. Companies were now required to use tamper-evident packaging seals, safety wrappers, breakable caps. Things we take for granted today were born out of this horror. Johnson & Johnson, though nearly destroyed by the incident, rebuilt its reputation through transparency. They introduced new packaging, launched national safety campaigns, and regained public trust, but it cost them hundreds of millions of dollars. The pharmaceutical industry was never the same, and neither was the public. Consumers became more cautious, more skeptical. Trust in over-the-counter medications was shaken permanently. But for the families of the victims, the laws and packaging changes weren't enough. There were no answers, no closure, no face behind the nightmare. Every few years, the case would resurface in books, in crime shows, now in documentaries, but always with the same haunting question. How could someone commit mass murder in plain sight and walk away without ever being caught? Decades have passed. Technology has advanced. Cold cases once thought impossible to solve are being cracked open with DNA, digital tracking, and new forensics. And yet, the Tylenol murders remain untouched, still unsolved, still haunting. Over the years, law enforcement has re-examined the evidence multiple times. Capsules, letters, fingerprints, everything that was collected in 1982 has been reviewed with modern tools. But even with today's science, nothing has definitively linked anyone to the poisonings. There were suspects, James Lewis, of course, a few others briefly, but no one ever faced murder charges. No one stood trial. No one paid for what happened. The Netflix series brought the case back into the spotlight, and with it, a new generation of viewers, armchair detectives, and cold case experts asking the same thing. Is there something we missed? Could the killer have been someone completely unknown to the investigation? Could they have taken their secret to the grave? Or could they still be alive, blending into society, watching documentaries about their crime, knowing they got away with it? One thing is certain. This wasn't a random act. It was methodical. It was rehearsed. And it changed the country. So we end where it all began, with a single question that still echoes across 4 decades of mystery and fear. Who opened those bottles, and why did they choose to kill strangers using medicine? Because until we have an answer, the Tylenol killer isn't just part of the past, they're a ghost still haunting the present.